There's some snow.
All right, welcome everybody. We're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna introduce myself and then I'm gonna have panelists introduce themselves. My name is Joel Christian Gill. I'm a cartoonist, historian, and professor. Run the MFA in visual narrative at Boston University. And we'll just start down the line.
I'm Alexandra Gallant-Lee. I am an artist, science communicator, designer, and I love making comics about science and nature. My most recent comic that'll be out this fall is about neurosciences and brains.
And I'm Liz Francis. I'm the publisher and founder of a small indie publishing house called Street Noise Books that's based in Brooklyn, New York. We focus on nonfiction comics. We aim to be unapologetic, authentic, and politically relevant. About half of our books would fall into sort of a graphic medicine category, at least half. We have a table out there, and we're having a special buy two get one free just for you. So check it out after we chat for one.
Hi, I'm Zach Clemente. I am the publisher and founder of Bulgilham Press, which is a local small press publisher based in Somerville, where I live. Very much like a small operation, publishing 3 to 4 books a year. Outside of that, I also am the president of the board of the Boston Comic Arts Foundation, which is a arts advocacy nonprofit that does programming year round, including the upcoming Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo, and it's being held at BU in December, which is really exciting and sort of where BCAF sort of founded out of.
Awesome. So I've got a bunch of big quick picture questions. So I'm gonna ask my first question and try not to talk too much, but there might be a follow-up. So but the first question I want to ask is what role do you think publishers play in shaping the field of graphic medicine? Feel free, anybody can move in.
I'm a self-publisher, so I'm like, I mean, obviously, like in my own world, I'm like, well, not much because I'm doing all the work, but that's not the case. But so I'm curious to hear.
Wait, say it. So how much do publishers?
What role do you think publishers play in shaping the field, right? Because like if you think about so think about it like this, as a side, right? Like romantasy is a big thing right now, right? And so like now publishers are scouring the internet looking for romantasy so that they can find the next, what is that fairy porn book? I don't know what it's called.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Everybody got said and everybody's like, know what y'all are reading. So
I think for me, I started Street Noise. I had been working at the big publishers for many years, for 15, 20 years before I started this venture on my own. And I did it so that I could do things that were out of the norm and that I didn't have to feel like I was chasing a trend of something like romantasy. Although I have to admit, last year when it was like really trending, I was like, hey, we have no romantasy. But I didn't. I didn't because
so tumblers for the fairy porn.
Yeah.
No.
I know it's still news, but not as
Yeah, but I'm just saying people.
Yeah.
But it's one of the, that is really, I wanted to be able to do things because I believed in that. So I publish things because they speak to me. And if it does often turn out that the things that I find and want to acquire end up being very timely. Unfortunately, sometimes, like this year, we published a book called We Must Take Part in Revolution about authoritarian dictatorships. You know, we're living that reality right now. But I think that I think it's different. I think small little indie publishers, we have that vision, or Kendra at Graphic Mundi, she also, you know, follows her vision and her heart and not, whereas a big publisher, they have to follow those trends and they But I have always been a believer that there's sort of a zeitgeist in culture. There's stuff that bubbles up, you know, that suddenly you'll have a lot of books about, I don't know, something. And it's because it's sort of part of the collective unconscious or something.
No, you get that absolutely.
Mhm.
It's definitely, yeah.
I think like speaking from our, like, I feel like we have a lot of very shared sort of like goals with what we're trying to do, but
Uh-huh.
like for me especially, I think what the responsibility of a publisher like us or smaller publishers is to remain authentic to ourselves and remain like publishing with integrity and publishing with interest and being like genuine as to why we're excited about the book we're publishing and not necessarily like aiming for a trend for trend's sake, but oftentimes like this can lead to not necessarily setting a trend, but being prepared for a moment as I guess, like saying like, oh, like this is like this certain thing is like, let's say, you know, graphic medicine is getting more popular, and it is. It's like this puts you in a really nice spot where like a lot of your titles that you're already interested in as a publisher fall within that category, and like since you were already have this like little bit of a process, like, oh hey, here are these artists I work with, here's like our press releases, here's all this other stuff, like it's easy to sort of slot in with these events and these programs and initiatives across different organizations and sort of be a player in that space that's really and like support it and help it grow in a really nice way. So like I feel like that's kind of the responsibility for publishers our size is to just be curious and publish the things that are excite us because there's going to be a interest for it and it's going to, you know, like overlap with a bit of a niche like graphic medicine at some
Yeah.
point. And being open to the possibility of those things, like, you know, keeping up with our inboxes, trying to be open to the possibilities.
Yeah, and I think for me, I publish something because it seems fresh and new and I'm curious about it.
Yeah.
You know, I remember when I met Maria Sweeney, whose book Brittle Joints, we published last year. And when I met her, she was fascinating to me because she was an ambulatory wheelchair user who had been adopted as a child from Moldova with this chronic, she'd been born with a birth defect called Brooks syndrome. I just was like, she was writing these little mini comics about what it was like to struggle every day as a wheelchair user in our world. And it opened my eyes to like, now I'm so much more aware of how, you know, revolving doors can be impossible for people in which, or, you know, if the elevator goes out in a building, how you're totally stuck then, what do you do, you know, or little things that I'm just much more sensitive to it now, knowing her. And that's what I wanted to do by publishing her story, was to share that with other people so that they could also develop that empathy or just a sense of understanding of what it's like to walk in somebody else's shoes for a moment.
My son-in-law is from Moldova, so we need to get that.
I have two authors who are from Moldova.
Yeah, because he said comics don't exist in Moldova. I want to let you know that.
Wow, well, I'll show you the two, they're in the other room, two authors who immigrated from Moldova to other.
Alexandra, how do you see comics and visual storytelling contributing to the conversations? You guys can answer too, but she hasn't talked yet, so I can share.
Yeah.
Contributing to the conversations around health, illness, and care.
One of the things that I think is extremely powerful about graphic medicine in particular is that you can kind of come at any scenario from sort of all perspectives. You know, it can be a patient perspective that details their journey through an illness or a procedure or something like that. It can be a surgeon teaching a technique to another surgeon. There are all these different ways to approach graphic medicine, and so finding both the right audience and then also encouraging people that are already interested in this, like, why don't you look at these other perspectives, because that's one way to kind of create the shared humanity. It's like we're all putting down these things on paper, we're all putting down images and words to describe our experiences, to describe like our thoughts, or to educate, or to share an idea, or to capture like a fear we had. And so harnessing whatever those emotions are through graphic medicine can be a really effective way to bridge sort of gaps in care. I mean, you might not understand the way someone's describing pain until you see it visualized, and then you say, oh, it's actually more like this. And we call that like spiking or sharp pain, but the way you're showing me made me think that it might be some other type of pain, things like that. There are visual ways that we can provide feedback to medicine that wouldn't be possible without graphic medicine. So I just think there's such, not missed opportunity, just a lot of opportunity there that's like yet to be and sort of ripe to be discovered. Particularly from personal narratives, whether they be from a clinician, a patient, a caregiver, you know, someone on policy, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, that's why I started Street Noise Books, not specifically to focus on graphic medicine, but I definitely did it to focus on helping develop compassion in people by providing a platform for these stories, so that we could feel what it feels like maybe to be in somebody else's experience. Because at the time, I mean, I started it right after Donald Trump was elected the first time. And that was really my motivation, was his presidency, because I saw the hatred that he was spewing and the insensitivity. And I thought, you know, to so many different marginalized groups. And then it now, can't believe it's come full circle again. Here we go again. But it's still that horrible hatred, the way that other people, because they don't know what it's like to be that person. And I've seen in my own personal family, I've seen that maybe, you know, my stepdad was really reluctant to use they, them pronouns for anyone. He thought it was, you know, I always hear this with people of that generation, you know, it's not grammatically correct. And I had to have big arguments with him.
It's also factually untrue. I was gonna say the same thing. Linguistics major.
But when he had, you know, when his beloved grandson was suddenly identifying as non-binary, he loves this grandson, my stepdad, and he's like, suddenly his heart opened just a little bit to think, okay, if it really matters to Eddie, like, I'm going to try to figure out, and I'm going to keep trying to correct myself, and I'm going to keep trying to use the pronouns that he wants. So and then I would hear stories, and you know, about somebody who, let's say, you hate all immigrants, but then, oh, wait a minute, but then there's this guy that lives next door to you, and he's like raising his family, and he's a great guy. And so once you get to know him, like, oh, maybe I don't hate immigrants. Not, I mean, all immigrants except the guy living with me, you know. And I felt like,
Special.
okay, what we need to do is help each one of us see what it's like from somebody else's perspective. And I feel that graphic novels in general are incredibly able to do that. You know, words can as well. When I read Michael Anthony's book, Civilianized, right? That's what it's called.
Yeah.
Yes, his prose book. I loved it because it was amazing. It was all about his coming back from the Iraq War and how hard it was to reintegrate into society, and how you know, how the world didn't welcome him back. And but so I was able to sort of see a different perspective from that. But when you actually see things drawn out in the form of a graphic novel, especially, not always, but especially when it's drawn by the person who has experienced that, like Bishak Som, who wrote Spellbound, which is one of our books. Bishak is trans, identifies as transgender, and suddenly you can see because it's her hand drawing what it feels like to be her. So I feel like suddenly you have as close a perspective to someone else's as you can get to when you're drawing it, what you experience yourself. So yeah.
I mean, you touched on so many wonderful points, but like the big one for me always is like, there is such a narrative and evocative power of comics that is so deeply unique to the process. Like, you know, I think sometimes I see people talking about comics and I'm like, oh, this marriage of text and image. I'm like, yeah, it's more than that. I think about, no, it really is just that. It is the sort of deep well of like experience and like connection you can make by just adding sequential like work to imagery. Like you get to actually follow along in a way that really starts impacting individuals as readers, and the story like really finds a place to settle with the heart. That's been my experience with comics my entire life, but like seeing, especially being like, working like, being part of Mice for 8 years and then with BCAT, like seeing the tent of readership grow so much, and people being excited about comics, and like people who were maybe like were young and they came back to them because it was becoming more of a popular thing, and realizing they could have stuck with it their entire time, and sort of rediscovering the world available to them, all the stories available to them, because one of the biggest uphill battles comics has in the US especially is not being categorized as a thing for kids and teens. There's so much more available to them, and like publishers like you especially, like having these amazing stories, but like often more catered to adults and their experiences is so important. And it's starting to really come to fruition, like the fact that this event can be here with multiple different like publisher representations and different books coming through. Like it really stands like people are reading these and they're excited about them and they connect with them, and that's really magnificent. Yeah,
Like
yeah.
10 years ago, when I was working at Brigham Women's Hospital, I was like, started getting known as, oh, she's the one that won't shut up about comics. And that was like a pejorative at the time. They're like,
Sure.
never so fun. And then like after about, slowly, people would be like, wait, you're a comics girl? I'm like, like, talk to me about comics. I'm always like, we have checklists, like a lot of people have heard of the checklist manifesto. And also in the previous session, talking about getting on a plane, how they show you very visual things. They also hand you a comic, which is in the seat back pocket. It's like the most important comic. It has no words except numbers, so you know what sequence they're in. Because when it's a life or death situation, you don't really care. Like, get there's a slide I have to go down. But and it's the same thing in medicine. So like, where can we put comics in that we might not have thought about it? And like the checklist in the emergency room and things like that. I'm always like, there's lots of like beyond narrative storytelling. There's also places for comics and medicine that we might not expect.
Yeah, just to add to that, there's two things. I often say that comics are like an empathy machine, that they build empathy, and it's directly related to this idea that was put forth by these researchers in the early part of the 20th, the early part of the 2000s, where it was basically applied to advertising, but there's this thing called narrative transportation theory, that when you read a story or you hear something, that you are like you're like mentally taken to that place, right? And so when you and this leads to the idea that when you're sharing a story, which you said, Liz, specifically, they found that when people were telling a story, right, when there were these people that were going from door to door, trying to convince people to be pro-gay marriage or pro-abort, like pro-choice, and they found that people who were telling their own personal stories were more likely to affect change in those people. And I think that's directly related to narrative transportation theory and the idea that comics sort of like help you build those empathy. And that empathy that they're helping you build, you can tell that it works because people keep banning those books, right?
Yeah.
People that don't want us involved. But I just wanted to add that. But I want to talk a little bit more about the balance between narrative, art, and educational, sort of like. And so like, I know you guys both edit comics as well. Alexandra, you create comics. So like, how do you balance, like you don't want something to become preachy. So how do you balance the narrative, the art, and the educational content in comics when you're talking to people about them?
Well, I come from a background of being an art director. Everybody comes at it from different angles, but I was an art director at several of the big publishing houses, most recently at Scholastic, before I started Street Noise. So the first thing when somebody submits something to me, the first thing I look at is the art, because I can't work with it unless it moves me. And that's not to say that I'm the ultimate arbiter of what's good and bad art. It's just that I know what I like, and that's so the art has to work for me first. And then for me, it has to be a really powerful story. And I don't really come at it from the education as more of a
Results.
bonus. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's the art first, then the story, and so I like. When I was first doing street noise and I didn't get any submissions yet, because no one even knew street noise existed, because it didn't, except in my mind. I was going out and trying to find people to work with. So I approached people, I would go through anthologies a lot of times, and I'd say, okay, whose art do I like? Then I would, if I found somebody whose art I really liked, I would read more about that person and sort of say, oh, wait a minute, does this person have an interesting story to tell? Yeah, like my Gallant-Lee was a, you know, Iraq war veteran, like that's an interesting story already, like, and then wait, then there was a vegetarian vegan thing going on, like. And then I would approach that person and say, have you ever wanted to do a longer form? You know, would you like to explore, or maybe they've never written anything personal about their own lives, but because I was very focused on memoir and stuff, I would try to convince them to. Or see if they were interested in exploring, sharing their own personal story. That's how I, with Maria Sweeney, the Moldovan, wrote Brittle Joints. When I met her, she was doing art for her partner who was writing stories, and it had nothing to do with her personal life.
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, wait a minute, you have such an interesting thing to tell. Let's explore that together. So yeah, that's sort of the order that so
art, story,
then education,
education.
like the education is sort of, hopefully, maybe a result of. Cause I don't do strictly educational
Yeah.
things.
This is the part where I sort of take off the sort of reveal the cover, and like I publish almost exclusively fiction, so there are pieces of this where like the education element is much more of just sort of like a broader, like the use of fiction to build empathy, or the use of fiction to explore themes and other things that are potentially like adjacent or outside the realities that we currently live. But from an editorial perspective, I definitely like look to be moved by art first. Again, I'm visual, it's visual, but I do take a very deep look at all at the story structure, especially once the art. I sort of like, I have like a bit of a rubric in my head of like, okay, what about the art is interesting? What about the art is like compelling? I think I'm looking to be moved. I don't need like it to land in a certain visual standard. I need to be like, I'm looking for the craftsmanship, I'm looking for the mark making, I'm looking for like the impetus and like thought behind it. And then the story for me is really where a lot of the work comes in, because I strongly believe that like every comics artist can be their own writer successfully. Some need more help than others. Some need a little bit more editorial, some need more guidance, some need more like story partnership, but everyone of them can be, because they're already halfway there with the artistry. Like to draw a comic is to be a storyteller. Telling your own story can be more challenging, but it can be extraordinarily rewarding. So I work exclusively with solo cartoonists for this reason. And also I don't want to overcomplicate my contracts with writers. I'm just one guy.
Writers complicate things?
I'm just having more people complicate things, really, but also yes. As an ex-comics writer myself, yeah. We like to complicate things, but it really is a marriage, because like you can't help but look at the art first, obviously, you can't help it. But I try really hard to, especially if something visually is interesting to me, to like give the story as much of a really deep, like introspective, or like, you know, deep look as I can. And sometimes the story actually is the reason why I say no. Because like the art's really beautiful, but like it's not something this is not a story I feel like I can really publish, or like I don't think it's quite there yet, or I'm the wrong publisher for it. Or sometimes it is just, it needs another full revision. It's just, it's in the wrong shape or something. That could happen.
I think it's really interesting. Alexandra, I don't know how you feel about this, but as a creator, somebody who makes comics, the art doesn't come first for me.
No, never.
It
It's
never
always
goes-
an
it's the
idea.
story, it's always the
some
story, yeah.
image. Maybe it is like a flash of a moment, like, you know, like, oh, I have this like certain scene and or like a bit of dialogue. It starts from somewhere, and then I start thinking about that and expanding on that, and like ruminating on that. I have one comic, and it was like the first full-length comic I ever published. And it's a story that happened to me in 2002. And I'd been telling people it, like, you know, dying off of the story for years, like, oh, everybody thinks it's a funny story, it's great. And then I happened to make one little comic, 4-panel comic, and I posted it like in 2023. And everyone responded to it, and I was like, it's a story I keep telling. So like, found I had like 24 more pages and 27 more pages in me, and that one of Mice NEGM, which is very exciting. But it was one of those things where like it came from this thing that I had really been doing the whole time. But until I sat down and put it on paper, I had no idea what the art was going to be. I knew what the story was. But and then there are other things where I was recently drawing just like a diagram of like a neuron and some brain stuff. And I was like, wait, I have a comic I do. So it's never ever like linear or, and so I'll like drop stuff and also pick them back up. I used to abandon projects, but now I put them in the archives because that's much fancier. Like it's like some kind of mahogany book. But really, it's just like this old folder, and I'm like,
Flat file.
yeah, and like in the comic I have coming out soon, it's I ended up going on my old Tumblr and I was like, that illustration, I can overlay it on this new one and it's perfect. Oh my god, it works so well. So like I love cannibalizing my old stuff too. But you can never do that if it's like I'm gonna start with here's the script, here's the thumbs. Like I never work that way. If I worked with someone else and they needed to work that way, I would, but like when it works on my own stuff, which is also part of the emphasis of self-publishing, because it's like, yeah, what's your process? You know, pick up sticks, just chuck them on the ground and then that seems right.
But I think it's like, especially for small publishers, it's our prerogative to be more flexible with that. Like I work with artists who are like, I never saw a script in my
You always
life.
say self-indulgent with your comments, and
do,
I love that because that like completely got me. I was like, this is what I want to make. And then when I was making the stuff that I really enjoyed making, I'm like, oh, I really liked making it. It obviously, you can tell that in the process and how I talk about it, all the aspects of it, because it was enjoyable versus, you know, here's this project, I guess I like it. Like you're just not gonna feel the same way about it. So starting from the place of, oh, I'm excited about this, I wanna do this, is just a game changer.
It's really like just like I was just sort of completely thrown off by the fact that you guys look at the art first, and I always tell my students over and over and over again, story matters way more important than the art.
Well, here's the thing, I think
you
it's,
don't have
I
the,
think it makes a lot of sense.
yeah,
Because storytelling and our appreciation as humans is a universal thing.
yeah,
You're then layering the comics medium and format on top of that, that like notion, and it's sort of subsuming into each other.
yeah,
So we're responding to the output,
yeah,
which is visual, even if this, like, you say, like, we look at both, like, you know, if we're saying, like, I look at the scripts or the outline and the art first, I look at the art first.
yeah.
But it's like, we're responding to both, but like, we look at.
Yeah,
both
it
first.
doesn't mean that art is
Yeah.
more important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And I've published several people who don't consider themselves artists, who have sort of taught themselves to do art because they had something important to say.
yeah,
So it's not like I won't do that, like, Elizabeth Tremblay's book, and she's all about that, about how she believes that anyone can teach themselves how to draw. And then, or Kara Gormley, her book came out this year, and she didn't go to art school, you know, she's very, she had something important to say, there we go, it's up on, above my head.
You all have slides, just tell me when you
Amazing.
want.
I'm sorry for giving the joke slide.
Yeah, Kara had this incredible thing she wanted to talk about. She's actually they are non-binary. They are a biology professor. And so they approach everything from a very sort of research-based perspective. But they worked really hard on their art, and I liked the art ultimately. I think it you know, they used this little spot color of the blue you can see, and I think it was really effective at talking about, they were talking about their experience with past sexual assault, and then therapy that they engaged in that was really helpful, that was EMDR, which I didn't really know what that was until I met Kara. You probably all know what that is. Eye movement desensitization. What's the R? Reprocessing, thank you, I always forget. But we worked really hard, Kara and I, on like how to convey that, because they kept like sort of just referring to it. I was like, no, I need to see, what does it look like? And they were like, well, your eye goes back and forth. And I was like, no, show me, what are you looking at something? You know, so we did this whole, we worked on it a lot to make sure that everything was super clear. But they also were really good at figuring out how to depict when you feel like you're drowning in some memories, and they used actual water, you know, so I didn't choose to work with Kara because they have fabulous art.
Right.
I chose to work with them because I thought that the story was really powerful. But I wouldn't have signed up the book unless I saw that the art had this potential to work in a way that I felt comfortable with and happy about, so.
Yeah, I'm interested in like this idea, in my book fights, I dealt with, sexual abuse and trauma and all of the things that happened to me as a kid, and I wonder how you all approach. Like all of you approach like sensitive topics
Yeah.
in those works, like whether it's illness, whether it's trauma, or any of those things.
How do we?
How do you approach it? Like,
them?
how do you approach, I mean, cause it's, it's delicate, right?
Yeah.
You have to be very, you don't want it to sound, you don't want it to be like tropey, right?
Yeah.
Like, like personally, like if there's a TV show or a movie that has rape as a narrative device, I turn it off.
Yeah.
Like, I immediately don't want to watch it.
Yeah.
And can't sit through it. And like even things that I know that's like, I was watching Lady Sings the Blues, and I know that there's a rape scene in that, and it was like causing me stress just thinking about it.
Knowing
Like,
it's-
knowing it's gonna come up,
Yeah.
right? So when you all are dealing with sensitive topics, how do you help artists or create them? How do you approach that?
I mean, a big part of it is just trust, like, especially if we're publishing work that is like inspired by or directly like the story of the individual, like of their story. It's really navigating the trust with them, because oftentimes you need to trust them where they don't trust themselves, and sort of carry that a little bit on behalf of them while they're in the process. Like, I think one of the staple hallmarks of working with cartoonists is that there is always a bug of self-doubt, always a bug of imposter syndrome.
Self-doubt, really?
I know, but, and I think honestly, one of the responsibilities of the publisher, at least for me, is to remain like sort of stalwart and be like, you have this, I'm with you, I'm working with you, you one hand or two, we can make it happen, we can get together on this, and really like making sure that, I don't need my artists to feel like immensely confident all the time, but I do want them to understand that like we are publishing them for a reason. Like, we're excited about their work, and we're excited to sort of participate and bear witness in the process. So it's a bit of frankly a wider, vaguer answer, because I don't feel like I've had to navigate this so strongly. Like, I have books coming out about religion. I have books coming out about past traumas, and I have had books published about past traumas and stuff, but nothing was in my mind overly sensitive to the point where like we really had to sit down and have a conversation about it. But I've been preparing myself for a while.
Yeah.
For to have situations, and there's a couple books in my in process where I'm like, these are conversations we're gonna have to have on some level. Like, let's make sure that like, how does this feel for you as a creator? Like, how are you feeling about this? Let's talk through a couple scenarios, just so we're prepared about, will there be feedback? Will there be blowback? Let's consider some angles and just chat about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, I take my cue from the author. It's really what the creator's comfortable with sharing. What would you say?
I think like for most of my stuff, a lot of it is like my personal stuff, or it's like a story that's like, I have the thing coming out soon is about brains, but it's also about like my neurodivergent brain, and it talks about how like I have the ability to like, I have a highly accurate autobiographical memory. It's not great. Sounds like it's great. It's terrible. You remember like everyone's outfit on the first day of sixth grade, and they're like, "Why do you remember that?" Like I say, they find evidence. They're like, "That is what I was wearing." I'm like, yes. But but it's like that. And so in that book, I talk a little bit about like, this is what my brain is like, and I know not everyone's like that. So I want to be aware of the fact that like what might your brain interact with the world like, if it's a person who has hearing loss, are there other senses that they engage when sound is involved? Because you could see a speaker pulsing, you could see people tapping their feet, like, so I wanted to explore like all of the senses from different ways that other people might explore them. And then I have another piece that's coming up. It's going to be a webcomic, I think, just because I want it to be experimental, but it involves like some like it's a stage mother and little child star and the sort of exploitation that grows up that period piece meant to be like for children of YouTube parents, I guess, that'll be like the parable for them. But there's aspects of it I'm going to do that, because it's a webcomic, and there'll be pieces where scenes have a character on a computer, where you can choose to turn that part of the computer off. I want to experiment with like actual like taking yourself out of the moment in certain parts of the comic as well. So that's why I want to do a webcomic. So there's like lots of different ways I approach it, but like for most of my stuff, it's my story. So it's like, how much do I even feel comfortable sharing in the first place? For this thing that is like partially inspired by my own life, but also inspired by a lot of like sort of, you know, people you might think about, like, you know, Judy Garland, things like that. Like I want to be bringing those other stories in a way that's modern, but also give people the way to engage in it as much as they would like to. So should be an exciting piece. We'll see how that goes. It may be a big disaster, but I love experimenting with comics too.
5 questions, so I'm like going through like which one do I ask? Who do you all see as your core audience?
Cool people, no, no, I mean. I think I am absolutely targeting like. The audience I need to grow, the audience is comic artists, which is a bit of a smaller audience, so I'm finding ways to grow it, but, I mean, it's one of those things, like, I'm a big believer in that if you make a really compelling work that is niche in topic and very, like, very, very deep, like, you know how, like, the educational model, it's like the 300 classes get more specific and stuff.
Yeah.
Same idea, it's like, it will find its audience, it's like, oh, this is going really deep into a subject, or really deep into an idea, and it's really exploring it, that's a very exciting fiction model to like, to experience, like. Fiction enjoyers. I'm not really, I don't enjoy this is actually really a question, I don't think about my readers at all. I think about getting them, I think about, I mean, like, I think about getting the books in places where movies in front of them, I think about engaging with them at festivals and stuff, I think about, as a publisher, this is not me as a person, but as a publisher, I have to have an obscene amount of confidence that I'm just making the best thing. And whether I act like it or not, that I think that is my prerogative for my artists, is to like, I need to, yeah.
I haven't put it. You said that out.
Yeah, that is not my little Ahsoka, that is somebody else's, that's honest, whatever, yeah, go ahead, thank you, but. I don't think about the reader very much, because I know they're gonna be there on some level. Like, if there's a day where I sell 0 books in SPX, we're done, it's over, but like. Right now, I think about my artist, I think about the feeling of holding the book in the hand and how exciting that is. And that's all I need.
I always think about like curious people, because I make a lot of stuff that also appeals to children. I have like a goofy little frog character, and I made a comic that's called Fried Zine Tomato, that's just me having insomnia and watercolor painting and researching different types of tomatoes last summer. And it's also taught people that it's not signed, which is exciting when they come out, they're like,
You got a sign.
Yeah.
it's zine, isn't it? And I'm like, yes, it is.
I want to make it fun.
All to you.
But like all of those different things are like, you're either curious, like, why would this person make a whole comic about a tomato? I would like to know that. Or they're curious about the frog's adventures, or they're curious about brains, or they're curious about like, it's just people that are curious about something. And because I'm a science communicator and science storyteller, that's usually the hook. Like if scientist isn't curious about what they're doing, they're never going to be able to get me excited about what they're doing. So I'm always like, that's where it's got to start. And so if there's something that can spark curiosity in the audience, like it's the curious audience that I want.
Someone recently, I was having this conversation with like a woman about my age who's a very successful investment banker, and she didn't know anything about graphic novels, like nothing, and had never read one, maybe had never even seen one. But she was asking me all these, you know, it was like at a dinner party, she was asking me these questions like, who is your target audience? And I was just like, I felt sort of like backed into a corner, like, because like Zach, I don't do this for that I'm not like, I didn't start Street Noise to try to be successful, you know, I'm not like, I did it really with a mission of trying to make amazing books. And then with with like, if you build it, they will come, like with the idea that if you make amazing books, someone's gonna love them. And it just, you know, I do think about the audience in that, like, I had to decide when I started out, was I doing work for YA? Because when I first started Street Noise, I was very focused on the YA category. I think because I came from Scholastic, so I was very like, that was where my head was at. But I quickly discovered that most of the books I was ending up making really were adult books. I could pretend or sort of shoehorn them into the YA category, but it was really adult stuff, except I liked the idea that the subject matter of our books would appeal to people in their, say, early 20s, because I love that age. I love that time in life when, like, your mind is just so curious and you're forming your own opinions. You become very opinionated about stuff, you know, it's just that, it's like, by the time you're my age, a lot of people are pretty jaded and pretty much like, oh, you can't change anything, it's always gonna be like this. And I mean, that's part of why I'm super excited about Zora Mamdani, but and because there, you know, this idea that like that age group in their late, you know, 20s and early 30s, you're still believing that the world can be what you want it to be. And so those are the people I wanted to reach with Street Noise. I should have told that investment banker that.
It's always interesting when the real world tries to apply like behavior to your love project. It's like, don't please.
KPI.
I know what these things
No, I know what
It's
they
so,
mean.
yeah, it's good for you. You don't have.
Don't.
I'm so happy for you.
Don't Google it.
Oh, it's
What do you think the ethical concerns are about publishing in this space? And I ask this specifically as someone who publishes a lot of stuff that's based on history that we've also, like, I've gone down long rabbit holes with my publishers about, like, how do we cite sources? How do we do this thing? How do we, like, what do we do? Like, what do you think are the ethical concerns in giving information in this specific space?
I publish fiction. So when it comes to like information, I feel like that's not so much of an issue, but I think again, like it's about. I think I actually really don't know, because I feel like I'm always right. Maybe that's a problem.
I've seen it go wrong when like they invite film crews into hospitals and things like that.
Yeah.
And they, you know, in the 90s, quite notably, and then in the 2010 or so. And so those sorts of things, it's not the same because obviously you're like reporting something in that way. But in the same way, like taking that as like kind of a touch point, like what are the ethical concerns when you're observing people in those spaces? Like, is it somewhere someone would expect to be observed if you're talking about like, this is my experience in a waiting room, that sort of thing. Like how much, you know, are you characterizing people? Are you caricaturing them in a way that is distorting them so that they're unable to be identified? So those sorts of things, it's just kind of thinking about like, yeah, the presence of other people in the spaces that you're in when you're sort of reporting these observations. But then also like, you know, if you're someone who you know that you might be viewed as an authority and you're learning something new, like those sorts of ethical concerns, like if like I love when scientists are like, this is what we think it is right now. We're not totally sure. We're going to try this other thing and hopefully confirm it. And then they come back and they're like, nope, it did not work, because you're like, okay, this is a process. So like that kind of sort of ethical transparency around like the unknowns that are in this space too, I think are important to come at the table with.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that I always would let the author take the lead, like, because I'm doing memoir, so there are ethical concerns about what you want to share with the world, but it's, you know, I'm walking beside them and holding their hand, and if they're comfortable sharing these things, then I'm comfortable advocating for them. And Yeah, I mean. But I think on a larger scale, I think our ethical obligation is to do the work. Is to publish this stuff because it's so important right now more than any other time that I've been alive. We have this moral and ethical obligation to keep doing this really important work.
Like I was being glib earlier, but genuinely, like. I think one of the reasons why I've published very little nonfiction is not out of the disinterest of nonfiction, it is sort of a recognition that the works that I'd be most interested in, frankly, are finding better homes at publishers who are more capable for them.
Yeah.
But genuinely, like, if the right project were come along and I was like, this is the thing I feel like I really am the right one to publish, it would be my obligation to work with the author and like be an active partner in that sort of thing. Like, nothing frustrates me more sometimes when I like. Well, all I think is frustrating. One of the things that frustrates me within this sort of circle of publishing, when I see a major publisher kind of throw their author under a bus, where it's like, oh, we didn't fact check any of this. I'm like, okay, one, it's bad that your author didn't do this, but also like it is your like responsibility as an editorial to fact check this stuff and like stand by what you publish. Like, I get that you're in it for the money, but like, I'm sure your PR team would love it if you didn't fuck this up. I'm sure your legal team would love it if you didn't fuck this up. I feel like that is your responsibility, and just trying to publish as much as possible isn't the answer. So like as a small publisher, like we're extraordinarily curated. It is, it should be built. It feels like it will be just built into the process to be more active and more participatory because we kind of have more skin in the game.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I one of the things I tell people when people ask me like, oh, what do you look for when you publish? You go to publish it. What's your rubric? I'm like, I gotta be in love with it because I have no business publishing otherwise. Like if I publish 3 or 4 books a year, if one of them I pick is kind of like, well, I thought it would do well. I lost. Like that's it. I'm done.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah.
Completely. Learned that early on.
Mm.
You have to love it.
When when my first book, Strange Fruit, Uncelebrated Narratives from Black History, it was a collection of stories that came to me, right? Like it was like I started finding these stories and people started telling me these individual stories. And if you've read Strange Fruit, one of the glaring things you'll recognize is that there are no women in Strange Fruit Volume 1. There's absolutely no women. And so I was going on a TV show and someone asked me about that in the green room. They were like, why didn't you put women? And I'm like, oh, I was talking about this idea that somebody on Tumblr, right, had like reached out and said that I was misogynist, right? And they were like, you're a misogynist. I'm like, so in my head, I'm like thinking, I'm not misogynist. I have wife and children and, women friends, so I'm going through my head, right? And then this person asked me this question in the green room, and I'm like, yeah, it's just the way the stories came to me, right? And so, and that's how I was thinking about it, right? I kept thinking about it more and more. We go on stage and we're on camera, and they asked me about it again, right? And when they asked me about it again, like I had some time to think about it, and the thing that I said was, I'm sorry. Like, this is what male privilege is, right? Like, I didn't think about like looking for stories for Black women, right? I just thought about that, and I'll fix that moving forward, which ended the conversation in total. And so when I did Strange Fruit Volume 2, I made sure that to seek out the stories for women. And so my question to you all is, how do you ensure that diverse voices are represented in the work that you either create, Alexandra, or the work that you guys publish?
Great question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's part of the mission of Street Noise from the very beginning, was to publish the voices of marginalized people. So I'm always looking for work by people from marginalized groups, or what I like to say is the books that big publishers are scared to publish, for whatever reason, because from my experience was, when I was working at the big publishers, there was a big movement for, we need diverse books, and that was great. I mean, thank God. And there was cartoonists of color. There was like all these databases that were coming up, and the publishers were actively searching for diverse voices. But I found as I was really in it, I found that they were really picking and choosing those, which of course because we all pick and choose, but they were picking and choosing the diverse voices that fit into like a neat little package that that wouldn't offend anybody. So, because they have, you know, they were thinking of their readers across the country and, you know, middle America and all this stuff, and so you didn't want anyone, you know, even like the queer people had to be like nice little neat little queer people. It was like
It could be the wrong type of queer, right?
the people of color had to, you know, fit a little narrative that they had in their heads of this is the way we want people to behave. And I just saw so many really important stories falling by the wayside because the big publishers were scared. And so I made a commitment to try to find those voices that were going to push the envelope a little bit and were going, you know, and that weren't heard from before. And I turned down a lot of submissions by people who, you know, maybe the art was good and the story was interesting, but it didn't need me to publish it. Somebody else is gonna find it, you know, so so it's a constant sort of refrain in my brain to remember to always look for the people whose voices aren't being heard.
Feel kind of lucky that I went to college around here. I went to Northeastern for criminology, which is like secretly the study of systems and how actors behave within these systems and how the systems interact with each other.
CRT.
Yeah, it's like a psychic like damage. I'm like, yes, so I learned, I have a little CRT slides. I thought the whole presentation is hilarious. It's like, this is Derek Bell. I'm like, and but going to college for that, it gives you perspective of like, who is this harming? Who is this benefiting? Like, who is not being heard? Who is being overly heard? And so having that education, like right from the jump when I was like 18 years old, completely changed my life. And I'm like incredibly grateful for it because it's also meant that throughout my life, I've surrounded myself like in a hospital, which is an extremely diverse place to work. So there's lots of different voices, like on any given day, like talking to people from like multiple different countries, like and comics as well. Comics is very diverse as well. And so by finding these, and a lot of it's just because it is outsiders, people coming together and being like, oh, we're gonna make this thing, or we're gonna do this thing, and that's why these groups form. But just like being aware and asking those questions right from the jump, you can kind of like build that into your perspective whenever you're doing anything. And yeah, the whole CRT thing, I was like, so my whole education was illegal now. Like, you criminal or
They actually answered the question, I think. It's one of those things where like, figuring out in such a way, it's such a selfish endeavor. It's something I've learned is actually a strength. And the incident, it isn't a strength, well, there it goes, but for now it is. And I think Joel, you can relate to this. I'm a bit of a contrarian. And which
Me?
yes, no, yeah, no. But what this means is I have always found myself gravitating towards stories that did not fit a
Yeah.
mainstream palette or was sort of like, you know, I was definitely an annoying teenager, and then annoying 35-year-old about certain kinds of media and things like that. I've just learned to be quiet about it and express it in different ways. But that means that the stories I'm interested in tend to be stories that don't fit those kinds of structures or those kinds of formats, and sort of through happy, like sort of a happy accident, and then like through purposeful accidents, they are just made by people with very interesting stories to tell, and they tend not to be white or male. But they generally don't. I think like I was joking with Jesse for years. Jesse Lonigan was the only white dude I published. Actually, only dude I published until recently. I have added one more on out of the 10 or so. And just because the stories that excite me and interest me, like they fall outside of a certain situation, and like, you know, I gravitate towards storytelling mechanics and techniques that, you know, I think it's like, you know, graphics or for a second would be like, let's polish it down a little bit.
If someone wasn't, you know, naturally, or, you know, like just let's go back to 2020, because I think this is about the time that this happened. After the George Floyd protest, that was when all the publishers and people, Hollywood too, started shaking the trees. We need Black stuff, right? Like what advice would you give to people who are either creating stories, who are like now thinking this is the time when people, I think, actually the current climate is when people are actually searching these things out more because they feel like they're threatened. Well, as there, and in some instances, people are sort of like afraid to like put the stuff out there, but there are other people who are like Liz in a way, like I'm gonna double down on this. What would you say to those people who are now looking at this situation and seeing this and saying, I need to tell more stories like this with diverse voices? What advice would you all give them?
You mean to the creators?
To the creators or even publishers, like, you know, if like a publisher was like, as publishers and creators, like, what would you tell them to do in order to make sure that they were including diverse voices?
Start small and build trust, because if you can help them do one small thing, maybe it's just a zine that needs to be probably, put out for. An activity, it shows it's more reciprocal, it's not just sort of asking for something. And then it also establishes like, okay, we finished this one thing together, we can grow on that. And, okay, small starts, start small and establish the trust.
Yeah, it's funny, like, I feel like when a publisher says that, it sounds like they're being like conservative or like careful with their budget, careful with their money, but genuinely, I think like you're correct in that there is a recognition that if a larger player in publishing, even if it's a small publisher, to some creators, they are a larger player, says like, okay, I want to make sure I'm, present in this time and represent these stories. It can come off as exploitative if you're not careful. So like building trust with individual creators or communities is such a crucial way to do that. So
Create a program around that.
Yeah.
People, there's like ways to do that. Then there's also like existing ways. It's always like, do the research and see what else exists, because you're probably not reinventing the wheel. Someone else already did that. You're just gonna pull.
Yeah.
Speaking of like talking to institutions, and giving them advice, graphic medicine often challenges the authority of like doctors in a way that we're saying we can teach you something in a way that's different than your bedside manner is. How do you balance that? How do you balance that with institutional or academic publishing standards? And I know this is probably not a question you would answer. Is that?
I mean, I can answer a little bit.
Yeah.
I have it's a little bit dependent, I come from a medical family.
Yeah.
And one of the things I find very interesting, especially and so compelling about this organization and this practice, is that it's coming from people who work in these institutions in many ways, that they are involved. I know the picture's there. Keeps going through it.
So there's no way to go back.
I
and
know,
forth
I'm
about
so
it.
sorry. I did not judge the tone of this panel correctly last night when I put the panel, the slide in, but is that there's a delicacy, especially right now, where like if you think about the fact that there's so much medical disinformation that's been happening in the past like 10 years or even longer, but it's becoming so the forefront is the recent and the forefront is absolutely ridiculous. But it's sort of like, okay, how do you represent to medical professionals who are under attack a lot right now that there are interesting, like, different ways to approach situations, to approach like diagnoses, to approach care that is very worthwhile to listen to and to engage with. Like, and I think it's really beneficial. It comes from people within these institutions who are inside their world to some degree and not just explicitly outsiders who are like, who seem like they have a bone to pick or something. So that's a huge benefit. I'm not sure with the advice we'll be able to keep doing it and find ways to present it as like we are peers in unfortunately in an industry, but in a practice of sorts. Yeah. Like the trust is everything.
There are metrics too. So there are studies, there are things that you can, and scientists love data. So if you can bring them any kind of data and say, oh, actually, like there's one study that I'm gonna completely botch, but you get the gist of it, where it was take-home instructions, post-op. They gave people like 7 pages of just text, and then they gave people post-op instructions with comics in it. And something like 50% of the people with the full text ones abandoned them, and 90% of the people with the comics ones actually read the entire thing. So it's like those sorts of things can lead to more beneficial outcomes. And so tying it directly to patient care can be the kind of game changer there. And then also pointing out when something is like, a lot of people like, it's a tradition, it's an institution. It's like, okay, well, we did it this way for a very long time. And then we figured out like, I don't know, we don't need to like, you know, like we can save people's limbs when they get cut off now. We didn't used to be able to do that, but now we can organ transplants. Like there's all these things that we're like, no, we can't be doing those. What is this? We're gonna like start draining people's humors and things. No, we've evolved. And so that's it. There's never going to be a point where we know everything. And so if you ever come to medicine acting like that is that point, then you're already setting yourself up for failure because that means you can't learn anything new. And that sometimes is like, I guess like did come a little bit of, you know, we aren't using leeches in the surgery anymore.
These are frolics.
I do like the ether dome though.
Yeah.
I'll just wait and see if Liz.
I don't.
How do you think comics will change? Like, do you think comics are going to affect the medical profession, our advocacy in the next 10 years? And if not, if you don't think it, like, if you do think it will affect it, how do you think it might affect it? Like, if we can make this thing more popular, right? What do you think will people start to see? Sorry, I'm asking hard questions.
Yeah, this might be the overconfidence again, but I feel like comics is just, it's growing in interest and popularity in general. Like we're seeing, like Jill, your program, more and more universities up to a point recently investing in and being interested in sort of carving out a like a narrative program as opposed to just illustration program, and things like that. So like we're seeing more, you know, kids who grew up loving comics being interested in making them and telling their stories that way, and that being a more default way of describing their worlds. So if we just, you know, having more kids who do that and also medicine,
Yeah.
then I think it's going to happen. I feel like it's inevitable to some degree.
I think you'll start to see it specifically. I think you'll see like if you go to Children's Hospital right now, you know, they have piano stairs, everything's really colorful, there's an aquarium, there's like lots of stuff that welcomes you in, you don't feel like, oh gosh, I'm at the hospital, you're like, it's clear because it's for children. But I think that kind of stuff is getting slowly more incorporated into all sorts of healthcare facilities, and so comics is gonna be a big part of that, because a lot of them can be comic murals, but a lot of it is like using comics to kind of shape a place. And so that's one area where I think it will be kind of unexpected, but you'll start to see more just friendlier places designed, because like you say, the kids growing up with this stuff are the ones that are going to become the doctors and the designers and all these things.
Well, and I think just generally, I think one of the reasons that comics are getting increasingly popular, and I think it's just gonna keep growing, is because of the nature of our culture right now, where we have such short attention spans, and we're so used to like flipping through our phone, and we need visual stimulation. It's very hard to sit and read something for a long time. Our attention span doesn't really work like that, and I think it's just, so we need to adapt, and that's what comics are. Comics give you a way to adapt to that kind of a culture. Yeah, I mean, I think that's why people that I know of who are adults who weren't comics people to begin with are suddenly open to reading graphic novels, because they realize that like it's hard to sit and read a serious book. I mean, it's part of the reason I did it. I remember the thought process back when I started Street Noise was that, especially in the area of nonfiction, something like a book like Stamped, like it's hard to sit and read the prose book Stamped. You have to decide, like, I'm gonna do this now.
Yeah.
And sometimes I have in my life, I've said, I need to know more about, like I read The New Jim Crow back years and years ago. And I remember saying, because I'm not a fast reader, so I said, I need to know what this book is about. I need to read it. But it was a commitment to sit down on the couch with the book and like the light over my shoulder and like, okay, read a chapter and then think about it and teach yourself. Whereas a graphic novel version, it keeps you, you know, it engages you right away. You can read a couple pages, put it down, pick it back up again. You're right there. I remember this really cool graphic novel I read called, I think it was called No Borders. Now I want to get it again, and I got it out of the library, but I need to read it again. Because right now it's so timely. It's about like the author and the artist explored the whole idea of what if the world didn't have boundaries. We didn't have like geographical boundaries or whatever, or political boundaries. We didn't have countries. What if people could just travel back and forth? Like, what would that look like? And they confronted all the things all the arguments that come up against that. And it was so compelling, but I would never have read a book like that if it was prose.
Yeah.
Because it would have been heavy, not physically,
No, I got
but just like serious, and I don't have room for that in my life. But as a graphic novel, I can read that. So I think that's where we're at as a culture. Hopefully, they'll all get on board and they'll read all of our amazing books. Yay.
Do you think that there are areas in graphic medicine that are underrepresented? And
Tell me.
and needs to, and need to be spent, we need to spend more time on, like, people need to like, there need to be more works in that specific thing.
I'm gonna take a wild stab and say the things that are underrepresented in medicine in general.
Yeah.
Is what's underrepresented potentially. Actually, I wonder if it's actually a little bit skewed where graphic medicine's trying harder than to pull the big ship that is medicine into certain directions.
Like
Like what?
Oh, I have no idea. Women's health. I guess women's health.
Women's health.
Reproductive health potentially. Yeah.
Reproductive health.
Yeah. I bet there are more zines about like.
There's more zines about menopause than there are about like a lot of, any kind of research available to you.
Yeah.
Easily accessible and in kind of digestible format.
More zines about that than Mayo Clinic articles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also things from like the perspective of the patient and physician, or like, is it a physician who has a terminal illness and now it maybe makes them reevaluate their career, or maybe it's someone who has a disability and they're navigating how to become a physician in that space. Gives them a completely unique perspective, but also like it shines a light on like what are challenges and the negative aspects of it that they face with it, because obviously like people used to ask me why I went from working like criminal justice to like the medical healthcare system, and I would be like, it's all the same system. And they don't ask me that anymore. Because most people just kind of get it. So the way that people are treated within both of those systems is very similar, and the same sorts of people have power and the same people are disadvantaged. And so just looking at who is not being represented in a lot of these voices. And then also I would say in specifically is like carceral medicine is something that is completely like no one even thinks about, like what do medical facilities in prisons look like, what does medical treatment, people are denied treatment, especially mental health issues, they're like just left without their maintenance medications, things like that. And so there's so much there that I think can be explored as well.
I would probably add to that I think more men need to write about sexual trauma, because I don't think enough men write about it. And so it feels like it feels like there's this thing that's happening that we are not talking about.
Stigmatized,
Yeah, because it's stigmatized and people aren't talking about it. And so like there are lots of men, right? Black, white, other, right, walking around like holding this trauma, thinking that it means something about them when they don't realize that they're not alone.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I want to ask one more question and then I'm going to let y'all ask some questions because I think we got
5.
I think we have 5
It's
minutes.
got
we got 5 more minutes. Oh, we got 5 minutes. Oh, then I won't ask another question.
Okay.
I'll let you guys answer questions. Ask questions. LB.
So how are y'all dealing with payment processor bans, legislation bans? Because it's causing me a lot of trouble in my working life just in the past 2 months. How are y'all dealing with that?
So it hasn't affected me yet, but it's definitely a thing I'm very much keeping aware of, and as a customer of like Stripe and stuff like that, I have definitely sent feedback multiple times. Called, like I've been active in the process of like, hey, this is a thing that could eventually affect me, and I have an active customer, like, you earn money from my business. Is this really the route you want to go down? And I've been I've worked at my day job, I've worked I do a lot of vendor management and stuff, so I've learned the right voice to take and the way to represent an idea, like a very mean idea in a way that is presentable as feedback. So I use a lot of that. It hasn't affected me directly yet, thankfully. In my business.
What is the band you're talking about?
So there have been, it started in the most recent one started in Australia. It was an Australia focus group that was trying to get PayPal, Stripe, other payment processors, MasterCard specifically, to apply a very broad definition to like
Fights would have been banned.
fights would have been people like MasterCard would not have accepted payment for someone buying fights or selling fights, like this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Basically hitting at financial institutions that move money around for everything, saying like, oh, this kind of content, we can't sell it, you can't
But
sell
would
it.
that be also, I mean,
Yeah.
is that only if the creator is selling the work themselves, or is that in a
It's-
store? Like you go to a store?
Fines would be illegal, well, not illegal, just
Mhm.
logistically impossible to sell in any
Through a
way.
POS.
Taking payment through PayPal or MasterCard.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And
I mean,
since, yeah,
Is it, for example, like if a organization doesn't want anything about queerness, they're like, we can't sell this.
Yeah,
They're like trying to change it queer so that queer means like adult, like the
But-
hiding it,
yeah.
but then also it then ends up being like, oh, it's all blended in.
also
Whatever,
so
like,
like
things
sexual
that we have
content,
before.
queer content, any discussion of child abuse is being banned.
Yeah.
Which is really
Even
fucking
like
me
Which
up.
is a really good way to make
medical or
kids not have
memoir.
language to describe their own.
yeah, it's really dangerous. It's very
That's
dangerous.
the
awful.
first I've heard of it.
It's a really
It's
extreme,
very
That's part of it
invisible
too.
to a
Yeah,
lot of people.
yeah, it's a very extreme iteration of like, it's a very similar mindset to book banning. But it's hitting it at like institutions that fundamentally are the basis for like,
It's the guys who make the cash register.
yeah, or
Wow.
beyond that. It's scary stuff, so I've been
So
keeping.
tracking down on can view even your free online content.
Yeah.
My blog is unviewable in the state of Mississippi
Yep.
because Mississippi passed
Age
legislation.
verification stuff, like
Yeah.
people in the UK have to upload an ID if they want to DM people on Blue Sky
Yeah.
because of that.
They prove they're an adult. Yeah.
Yes, to prove they're an adult, and then inevitably at Discord had people do that too, and then of course they all got leaked immediately afterwards, because the second you give anyone your information, it's gonna get leaked.
Yeah,
But
Wow.
yeah.
all that to say is also build your own websites, because like, there are plenty of like hosting providers, but if you can build your own website and take it with you, instead of just having it on Wix or Squarespace or like that, like I have a WordPress website. You can download all the archives into a CSV file, and then I can take that wherever I wanna go, and then I have my stuff. And so the more control you have over your own web content, web presence, the better it will be.
I will note that web hosts are also banning
Yes.
content. NeoCities just did.
Yeah,
So like,
Wow.
it's.
Getting back to the
slowly-
days of like, my friend has a server in his closet and he's gonna
Yep.
let us have some space from it, but that's
Yep.
what it'll be, because there are always the nerds keeping the infrastructure afloat.
Yeah.
I am wondering how far this will go. Like, there's a point
Yeah,
where,
okay, right.
like, if they make this too broad, there is genuinely billions that could be lost to these processors. So it's like, at a certain point, when are they gonna actually capitulate? Because it's like,
Right,
genuinely, if they make this too big, they're gonna lose a lot of.
yeah.
Well, we only have time for one question, so.
Yeah.
Alright.
No, it's a good question.
Well. I'll be around and ask the questions out on the floor. Come by Street
Yeah.
Books.
This is where you can find people
Yeah,
online.
I won't, because I have to go pick up my parents at the airport, but.
Okay,
I have an email address, so I can
It's
reach out to, yeah, reach out to me, please. I also live locally and stuff, so. Yeah, nice.
The big girl? That's probably the.
Oh,
I really want your advice on how to call and get, there was the conversation with Dan, but I know you have